Today we're going to make a ballet bar. First thing I had to do was glue up the feet so they could dry while I was working on the legs. I used my miter saw station to cut 4 equal length boards and then glue them into 2 feet. While the feet were drying, I went through the process of milling up some 2x4s that I had laying around from some pallets I had pulled apart previously. You may have noticed the timber that I used for the feet was already milled from the store, and that is because I bought all the timber for this project, and then when I got home I changed the entire design. I don't have a jointer, so I ran all 4 sides of the 2x4 through the thicknesser, leaving me with this parallelogram shape. So to correct this, I ran the boards through my table saw with the longest part of the side on the bottom, flipped the piece and ran it through again, giving me 4 square sides. I then measured out the holes for the 2 bars. After a lot of research, I found that the standard height here in Australia is 106mm for the top bar from the ground and 88mm for the bottom bar. Allowing for the thickness of half the feet, I measured out the 2 holes and using double-sided tape attached the legs together so the holes could line up and drilled them using a hole saw. I had to pull the legs apart so I could drill the holes in the second leg all the way through. For some reason I decided this was the perfect time to cut the bars to length. It does not matter the length here as long as they are the same. Now back to the legs. I found the middle of the holes and drilled pilot holes for screws on each side and widened them halfway through the size of the dowel I'm going to use to fill them in. I then attached the 2 legs together with double-sided tape again. Using a combination square, I set it to the distance from the edge of the leg to the outside of the hole, and then transferred this length to above the hole. And using a roll of tape drew an arch that lined up with the corner of my lines and the mark I just made. Using my bandsaw, I cut just outside the line, rounding over the top of the legs, and then used my random audible sander to sand to the line of both legs. After all of that, I decided I didn't like the look of the reclaimed timber, so I went back to the store and got some clean 2x4s and did it all over again. After giving the legs a quick sand all over, I removed the feet from the clamps and put them through the thicknesser, table saw and miter saw to square up all the edges and make them both the same dimensions. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button down below so you don't miss out on any future videos. I then marked out the placement for the legs on the feet. To do this, I first found the center of the length and width of the feet and made a mark. I then did the same on the bottom of one of the legs, lined up the 2 lines and marked the outside of the legs on the feet. I can then draw out the mortise to route out to accept the legs. Using a router and a straight bit, I then routed out the mortises. This is actually my first time doing this, and I'll save you the horror of seeing my first attempt. My second attempt, though, was a lot better. I can now use a chisel to clean up the mortise and test fit the legs. I then drilled 5 holes through the mortise, turned the leg and foot upside down so that I could transfer the pilot holes into the bottom of the leg. I then gave the top of the feet a good sand, as it would be a lot easier now without the leg in the way. I can then add glue to the mortise and screw the leg in place. Next, I assembled the bars and legs by adding plenty of glue to the bar holes and screwing the bars in place. I also added screws to the top of the legs. Got some quarter round Tasmanian oak to trim around the bottom of the legs. I cut 8 pieces at a 45-degree angle, then held a piece up to the side of the leg and marked the length it needed to be. Then back at the miter saw, with it at 45 degrees in the opposite direction, cut this piece to length. Using a pencil, I made a mark for repeated cuts and repeated the process for the shorter pieces as well. Using glue and brad nails, I then attached the trim in place. I then filled the screw holes with Tasmanian oak dowel and using a flush cut saw trimmed the dowels flush with the legs. Using a file, I rounded over the corners of the trim, gave the entire Ballet Barre a final sand up to 220 grit. I wet sanded the 2 bars to 1200 so they would be especially smooth on the hands. I did not like that you could see the end of the bars, so I made up some covers. Using a hole saw with no drill bit, I started at my drill press but discovered it was not powerful enough, so I used it to start each hole and finished with my handheld drill. I then routed the edge with my router table. Now I'm comfortable doing this, but I do not recommend it if you do not feel comfortable. If you do, make sure you wear correct PPE and go really slow. Using the belt sander, I then sanded the bottom of the covers to make them a bit skinnier, and then attached them with glue and held them in place with masking tape as a clamp. Two coats of boiled linseed oil, and it's done. So that concludes the Ballet Barre build. In total, it took me 1 hour and 23 minutes. If you liked my video, hit subscribe down below and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. You can also follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And my lizard just jumped off the Ballet Barre. And I'll see you next time.